Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to this mini series on Reconstruction of Religious Thought in Islam by Iqbal. And basically, in this mini series, me and Mahnoor Bhatti are going to try to explain this to you and to anybody who's watching on what Iqbal meant with this book and what is his message that he wants to give to us. So, shall we begin?
Absolutely.
Okay, so
excited for today's session.
Okay. So first in this session we're going to talk about the first chapter. And what is the first chapter called?
It is called Knowledge and Religious Experience.
Okay. So throughout this video and series, we're going to progress through this first chapter in a chronological order. And when we're going to face any terms or any concepts or key points, we're going to try to explain them in the light of how Iqbal saw them and how Quran sees it, because that is the point of all this book. So let's begin. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So in the beginning of the chapter, Iqbal basically talks about how there are major questions of life, like what is morality, what is our purpose, like why are we here, many questions. And philosophy is a field of study which tries to answer those questions. But it answers them quite vaguely. And religion also tries to answer those questions, and it does. Most of religions answer those questions: what is our purpose, why are we here? And however, religion is not just solely focused on the individual, right? Religion also focuses on society, which is much more broader. And where philosophy is based on free inquiry. What is free inquiry? Can you explain that a little bit?
So, philosophy, according to Iqbal, he poses a juxtaposition of A, what is philosophy, and B, what is religion. The spirit of philosophy, according to Iqbal, is free inquiry. By free inquiry, what it means is to question everything and to suspect all authority. So that is the basic dogma and the principles on which philosophy is actually built, to question everything. And we can see this throughout history. The greatest philosophers of the earliest time, Plato, Socrates, the Greek thought, they used to question everything. The Socratic method, very famously, was based on questioning everything. So that is the very essence and the crux of free inquiry.
And the purpose is to reach the truth, the ultimate reality of everything. So when we talk about philosophy, of course, philosophy is also trying to reach the truth of the ultimate reality, which we call, or which I think Iqbal also calls, God in this case. So when it comes to religion, where philosophy is always using reason to reach truth, religion had been using faith. Religion relied on faith, that you need to have faith to reach the ultimate reality, to know the ultimate truth. But Iqbal says no. Religion is more in a need of reason, of free inquiry than philosophy. Why? Because religion, the aim of religion is more broad, it's more in-depth. So what is the aim of religion according to Iqbal? The aim of religion is the transformation and the guidance of man's inner and outer self. So which is really vast, which incorporates not just me, but the whole society. And if the aim is so big, then why is religion but just based on faith? It needs to have reason, it needs to have logic. And then we talk about Greek philosophy and intention and thought, if you want to add to it.
Absolutely. So basically Iqbal actually says that Greek philosophy has been a great cultural force in studying Islam. So throughout history, Islamic philosophers have used Greek thought and the methods set by Greek philosophy to study Islam. But according to Iqbal, Greek thought is essentially classical. What do I mean by classical? It means that it studies the human reason alone and what is within human to study the universe or whatever our understanding of the ultimate reality is, so to speak. This is what Socrates has done. This is what Plato has done. They've studied humans and our sense perceptions and everything that we can experience ourselves to study the understanding of the universe. Whereas Iqbal says that the spirit of Quran is entirely anti-classical.
Anti-classical, yeah. That's why I just wanted to add, this is what Iqbal also says, that for Socrates and for Plato, for people like them, you know man only through man. However, the Quran, it does not ignore the outer side of the man as well, the signs of God, the nature of God. We're going to go into that detail right now with you.
To add to that point, it is worth noting, and I'm going to read a couple of lines from the book itself. It says, However, unlike the spirit of the Quran, which sees in it the humble bee as a recipient of divine inspiration and constantly calls upon the reader to observe the perpetual change of the winds, the alternation of day and night, the clouds, the starry heavens, the planets swimming through infinite space. So there is a clear contrast and incongruity between what the Greek philosophy is trying to say and in terms of what Quran tries to tell you to understand the ultimate reality. The spirit of Quran itself has repeatedly at many points asked you to study the changes, the perpetual changes of the universe, of the day and the night, of the planets, of the stars and of the moons, to understand the universe.
To reach the reality, to reach within yourself.
So this is worth noting, and this is an important point to note at this point, that the spirit of Greek thought is classical, i.e. it uses human thought and human reason and our perception alone to understand the ultimate reality, whereas Quran invokes upon man to use his understanding and to seek external understanding of the things that exist beyond us to understand the ultimate reality.
I just want to add to this that, so first we know that during the time of Iqbal and before that, the influence of Greek philosophy really kind of obscured the image of what Quran wanted from us. So every philosopher, most of even Muslim philosophers, they try to explain Quran in the light of Greek philosophy, which kind of obscured the image, the message a little bit. For example, we know that Plato, in this book, Iqbal mentions that Plato was against sense perception as a rule for knowledge. So he questioned the credibility of sense perception, whereas the Quran, it values the ability of hearing and listening and seeing. These qualities are considered a valuable gift and a valuable tool for us to reach the ultimate truth, to reach reality. And like Mahnoor just mentioned, that where Greek philosophy or where some philosophers and the Western thought says that we need to go inside us to find the ultimate truth, the Quran agrees with it. It does not disagree. However, it also supplements it with the fact that you also have a relation with the outside world, and the way you relate to the outside world, the way you communicate and how you understand the outside world will bring you closer to the actual reality. It does not dismiss the existence of the real world. So now here, can you explain just in a few words the polarity between ideal and real? So that has been a kind of like a taboo word or a war between in the world of philosophy between real and ideal. So what does this book tell us about
Absolutely,
it?
Myra, that was a very good observation to add. So Iqbal in this point says that throughout history there has been a sort of a tussle or a sort of war between reconciling the ideal and the real. And what does he mean by that? The ideal is basically what man has sought within himself, or can be found within himself, right? So to find the understanding of the universe, early Christianity, for example, this has been a war that has been going on throughout religion, to reconcile religion with rationalism or civilization. And when early religion also came across this thought, they thought that to find your conception of the ultimate reality, that man only has to look within himself, because there is a world that exists within our soul.
Yes.
And that is the ideal. Whereas real is everything that exists around you, and those are the actual signs that you can see, that you can perceive and you can think of.
That's where our senses come in.
That's where our
sense
senses.
perception.
Absolutely. So that is the real. So early Christianity basically sort of drew this line between, and a line of cleavage between the ideal and the real, because they could not reconcile the two. And they said that to seek ultimate reality, all man has to do is look within himself. Islam agrees with that, right? When Islam came, it did not discard the idea that there is a world that exists between you, inside you. It also said that this world, the ideal, exists in tandem and in cohesion with whatever exists in the real world, and that they are not opposite and that they are not in congruity with each other, but that they can be reconciled and they both exist simultaneously and very harmoniously.
Yes, harmoniously. That is the point. That that is the key word. That there is harmony between the inner and the outer. Now we are going to move on to rationalism. So now comes in this chapter. Now we're going to transition into where Iqbal talks about rationalists and how the view of rationalism, it tended to, reduce religion. It decreased the authenticity of religion. Why? Because for rationalists, anything that could be demonstrated, anything that could be sensed by your eyes or by your ears, by your senses basically, is real for them, right? But when religion talked about certain things like religious experiences that we have, which we're going to talk about a bit later in detail, you could not explain them in a sensory way. So according to rationalists, religion was reduced. They reduced religion. However, then Kant and Ghazali. So Kant was a Christian philosopher, and
he was a German philosopher, a famous one.
And Ghazali was an Islamic philosopher. And Kant basically destroyed rationalists. He, in his critique of pure reason, he destroyed the idea that you can be totally rational while being a human. Mm-hmm. So the tools we use for reason, they can't really be used to prove reason in itself. This is basically the gist was that Kant destroyed these rationalist ideas of being reasonable themselves. However, the problem was that with Kant's ideas, the tools and his tools, you could not use Kant's own tools to reach God, to understand God, to prove God. So that was kind of like a contradiction. And for that we have Ghazali, and Ghazali basically overcame that through the idea of a mystic experience. Now, what is a mystic experience? Because this is something that Iqbal really talks about in this book, and which Mahnoor will tell us.
Right. So adding to that point, Ghazali also was a staunch critic of rationalism, because he thought that the tools used to justify it were not enough or not sufficient enough to justify religion. So rationalism, right? And Ghazali, because he found no hope in analytical thought, then moved to mystic experience, and there found a venue or a crucible for religion to exist as an independent factor, right? Independent not just of rationalism but also of science and metaphysics. And what does mystic experience basically mean? So in very simple terms, because we're going to be talking about mystic experience a lot throughout the following chapters, is that everything that a man can experience which cannot be then demonstrated or cannot be then rationalized in terms of actual quantifiable terms. What I mean by that is the simplest experience or the simplest manifestation of a mystic experience.
Yeah, what is that?
Would be the experience of receiving a revelation.
Okay.
So for example, when a prophet is being sent down revelation, or when a man experiences that is a quintessential example of a mystic experience. Yes. Because it cannot be demonstrated. It is something that is entirely felt. Somewhat, I think it can be qualified under the sense perception thought, right? It is something that you experience.
And that again, you cannot explain a godly experience in your words. It's not possible.
There is no explanation to it. There is no demonstration to it. And that, according to Ghazali, that mystic experience is an independent crucible for religion to exist in, because it cannot be quantified or it cannot be explained in terms of science and in terms of metaphysics.
And when we move forward, Iqbal says that the only understanding of this mystic experience is the judgment by the person himself, right? And wasn't that the question of all these rationalists and other philosophers, I guess, that how do you, like you mentioned before, that how are you sure that the judgment of that person is true?
This is the thought that has been carried on by philosophers so far throughout the thought, that separating the mystic from the science and from the dogmas of principle and basically rationalism. But Iqbal, surprisingly, and within this chapter, tries to prove through the tools that are applicable and the tools that philosophy uses to justify science and to justify the dogmas of metaphysics, and uses the exact same tools to justify the legitimacy of mystic experience, and says that it cannot be invalidated. It is not inferior to philosophy. It is not something that exists entirely in our hands and cannot be demonstrated. Because of the tools that philosophy uses to justify science as a superior medium, or why it is so rational, he applies those same tools to mystic experience and to religion, and says the experience of religion is just as valid. It is just as legitimate as any other experience that is known to man. And going forward, we will explicate on those tools that Iqbal uses. Yeah. So right now, what we've covered so far is to get to the ultimate reality, with the reality of man, with the tools and basically the senses bestowed upon man, and also the reality of the universe that exists around us as dictated by Quran. So in light of that, it is important at this point to study what is the reality of man as a creation in this universe, and what is the reality of the universe itself, of which man is supposed to seek those signs. So what, according to Iqbal, Myra, does Quran has to say about the reality of creation, of man as a creation, and of the universe itself?
Well, according to Quran, and even according to Iqbal, because he believes in that, is that humans are basically the highest creation of God. Like, everything is a beautiful creation of God, but humans have the highest, you can say, they are put on the highest pedestal. And the reason for that, Allah mentions in the Quran in many places, is when Allah says that He offered His trust to all His creations, like to the mountains, to the rivers, to the skies, and all these creations, they refused to carry the burden of this trust. And it was only us humans who were foolish enough to accept this burden, and this burden was also in the form of personality. So this was the God's truth that He was giving to us, and we took it. We took it upon ourselves, and that is the reason why humans. That is one of the reasons why humans are considered the highest creation. And Iqbal actually explains this a lot more in detail, that why he thinks also is that humans are superior even to nature. And you can basically go in a lot more detail in that. But I would also like to mention one more thing that is also from the Quran, and that is when Allah describes the creation of man. When He was creating man, He had already created the angels. And upon the creation of the first man, that was Prophet Adam, peace be upon him, and God instructed all the angels to bow down before Adam. And the reason for that order to angels to bow down to Adam was to show them the superiority of man even above the angels. So when we think about angels, even individually, if you think about it, we think that angels are such a big creation of God, and what can be more perfect than that? But in the Quran, we see that Allah is ordering even angels to bow down to Adam, and the basis of that is knowledge. Because He says, I know what you don't know, and this man knows the names of things that even you don't know. However, you tell me, what does Iqbal say? What does Iqbal have to say about this superiority of man over nature?
So absolutely. The fact that God has already ascertained man's superiority over angels, which were a perfect creation, it is important to note at this point that man's superiority is not based on perfection, but based on knowledge. And which is also the crux of this chapter, because it's called knowledge and religious experience in light as experienced by man as a creation. And not only is man at this point, Myra, it's important to note, superior to angels, but it is also superior to all creations in the universe itself. And it is superior to nature, right? And Iqbal says that in the book, it says, and thus discover the means of realizing his, i.e. man's, conquest of nature as an actual fact. So Iqbal says that man has conquered nature, or man holds the power to conquer nature because of his power of knowledge, and because he is a superior creation. So, and it is because of this knowledge and because of this superiority that man holds a power to not only redirect nature but also shape it for him. When he is thwarted by it, it holds the power to reject it and also reflect inwardly, and also he holds the power to redirect it and recourse its action to his own favor and to his own devices.
Yeah, and that's what we see around. That's what we do, and that's why we have global warming. We have, we've destroyed nature in ways we want to for our desires. That's very true.
Absolutely. And it is worth noting at this point that man holds the power to shape his own destiny as well as that of the universe, now by adjusting itself to its forces, now by putting the whole energy to mold its forces to his own ends and purposes. And in this progressive change, it is worth noting that Iqbal says God becomes a co-worker with him provided that man takes the initiative. So I would like to explain on that point that Iqbal says that God only acts as a co-worker of defining man's destiny.
So how does this link to this idea of predestination when people say that, everything is written, whatever is happening is already written by God, and, I have no power over my fate. So how does this link to that? Like, here God is saying that I'm your co-worker if you take the initiative. But we have this idea in our culture, or maybe in the world, I don't know about the world, but in the culture it's like, likhi hui hai bhai, it is a takdeer, so this is destiny. So what do you say about that?
Absolutely, Myra. So it's worth noting at this point, and following up on our discussion from last time, where God says that man is actually superior to nature and the universe and the creations around it. God also says at this point that man actually holds the power to shape the course of nature and of the universe, and use his power and put all of his energy to mold its forces to his own ends and purposes. Right? And in this process of progressive change, God becomes a co-worker with him provided man takes the initiative. So what Iqbal's trying to say here is something really important and worth reflecting upon, and also building upon the idea of predestination, is that contrary to our popular belief, which is that everything has already been written down for us and that we don't hold the power to change our own course of destiny, Iqbal says it's not true. Why? Because God acts as a co-worker to man in shaping his destiny, provided that man takes the initiative. Now what this means is that man himself, because he is such a superior creation, holds in his hands the power to recourse or redirect the shape of the universe, and utilizes its power to the forces to meet his own ends and to his own purposes. And Quran validates this fact by saying, verily God will not change the condition of men till they change what is in it themselves. So at this point, Quran also validates to that fact that man has to take the initiative. Man is the person who is the forcing function of initiating change.
Yes.
And God at that point will act as your co-worker, but not as the person who defines your destiny, because it is man himself who defines his destiny.
And this actually reminds me of a really interesting, you can say, insight that I once got. And this is like in the Quran, Allah mentions in many different places, when he talks about our good and bad deeds, he says something like, what your hands have sent forth, right? You will be judged based upon what your hands have sent forth. So this metaphor basically means your deeds, what you did. So whatever you did in this world is literally what you sent forth in your afterlife, right? So what your hands have sent forth. So our deeds are defined by what our hands have sent forth. And if you look at it, like if you think about it, most of our deeds, like we do them with our hands, right? We write, or we do, like we make, our hands are involved in most of our deeds. And if you go to to a fortune teller or somewhere and you ask him, like, what is my destiny? Like, tell me, like, we go to such people and we ask, what is our destiny? So what do they see? What do they ask you for?
They ask for your hands.
Yeah, they'll be like, give me your hand.
Yeah.
Give me your hand. This is your destiny, right?
Yeah.
They'll look at your hand and they'll tell you your destiny. And maybe they're right, maybe they're right. But the point is, we have these lines of destiny in our hands. So symbolically, God has told you that your destiny is in your hands. It is in your hands. How else should God come and tell you in words like your destiny is in your hands? It's literally in your hands. So you write your destiny. And that's what you are going to be judged on what your hands send forth, what you do.
That's a very interesting sort of analogy. I never quite thought about it like that, but it's very literal and symbolic at the same time. Destiny is in your hands.
Yeah, it is in your hands. And what you, okay, you know how Allah says here, unless you change what is inside you. So when you change what is inside you, this will change. What is outside you, God will help you in that. He will be your co-worker. So that is also, I think, one way how Quran very beautifully lines the inner and the outer together, right? And God also does not take away His role in our life. He is very much present in our role. idea that God is just there, like he just made everything and now he's not there. He's there. He is helping us. Yeah,
Absolutely.
very interesting.
That's a
Thank
very
you.
interesting point to note.
Before we move on, I think it is important that we should talk a little bit about how we understand the idea of thought and intuition in Iqbal's perspective. So, how do you understand it? Can you enlighten us?
Right, Myra. So Iqbal has actually tried to explicate on this concept according to philosophy or philosophers who have explored it as thought versus intuition as separate entities which do not harmoniously coexist with each other.
And Iqbal says that they can.
Iqbal says that they can actually. So what
okay.
is thought according to Iqbal or philosophers, and what is intuition? Thought basically is everything that you can think of and perceive, and there's also related to sense perception.
Yes.
Right? So everything that I can see and everything that I can touch and I can feel and everything that how it formulates in my head is what is my thought.
Okay.
So my thoughts are naturally limited to whatever is present around me. My
Yes.
thoughts is limited by whatever the universe shows to me,
Yeah.
what my eyes can see, what my heart,
Whatever our organs are giving to the brain.
What-
That's what
exactly.
thought can. Okay.
that exactly is thought. Whereas intuition is something that is beyond something that I can experience, something beyond that I can touch and feel, but something that I cannot even explain.
Okay.
There is no rational justification for where that intuition is exactly coming from,
Okay.
but it is something that I experience within. Now,
Right.
Ghazali and other philosophers such as Kant itself, they were critics of thought as a reason or as a means of reaching the ultimate reality, because they
Okay.
thought that thought itself was limited
Limited.
by finite serial time.
Okay.
Because thought
Yeah.
obviously is limited to whatever it is in
Yeah.
this universe and whatever I can
Yeah.
see. So it is somehow thought is limited to human perception. And they thought that because of its finitude and
Yes.
because it's connected by serial time, that it is not a viable or a useful or a correct tool to reach the ultimate
Yeah.
reality.
And I want to add something to this. A really good example that Iqbal talks about in his book of generalizations. So Iqbal gives a very beautiful example of generalizations, and he says that how by looking at the specifics of something finite, of a finite object or of a finite event, by looking at its specifics, we can actually make sense of the whole. And that's what generalizations are. Like, for example, if I start explaining to you that, Mahnoor, this is metal, this is plastic, and you're like, yeah, but this is a mic. And I say, no, this is metal, this is plastic, this is a button, this is that. You'll be like, but it is a mic. So I'm right in my own self, but what I'm doing is I'm just focusing on just the specifics, just the
Individual
just the
element of
what do you know just the parts, and what she is seeing is the whole. So Iqbal, he uses this idea of generalization. So when you generalize something, like we know what is in the universe, we haven't really visited the stars, but we can generalize and we can know that there are billions of stars out there. So that analogy of a seed, like a thought, like I think he explains thought like a seed which has in it the potential to be a tree, a full blooming tree, and that is its maybe ultimate purpose.
Absolutely.
And we know that when we see a seed, we know that this is what it is capable of, and we generalize it, right? Or maybe you can say ascertain it or predict it, but it's there. And thought, we can't say that thought cannot reach this conclusion. It can, and it does.
Absolutely.
So that's how
and this exact analogy that Myra used to describe the mic, and also as a seed which contains itself the reality of blooming into a full tree, is the exact analogy that Iqbal tries to concur between or draw between thought and intuition. That thought, even though it is finite and even though it is connected by serial time, those are the actual proponents or the elements that lead to intuition, and those are basically the seeds which constitute towards the infinity loop of intuition as reaching beyond time.
Yes,
And
that's true.
and even though Iqbal says that that thought is finite and there is no denying that, but you cannot disregard or draw a cleavage between thought and intuition as two separate entities, because they're not separate.
Yeah.
They are just as much connected by serial time and finitude to reach the infinite as the tree and the seed, or as the metal or the pieces which contribute towards this mic as a whole. So moving on towards the end of the chapter, because we've covered most of key concepts, right at this point, Iqbal tries to explore and lay the groundwork on which to judge religion and science. And Iqbal at this point says that religion and science are not different, so to speak, or different from each other, because the tools on which to judge them remain the same. It is only the data or what constitutes science and what religion is different. So in a sense, the metrics by which you're judging both of them remain the same. And to elaborate on that fact, Iqbal says the region of mystic experience is as real as any other region of human experience, because so far we've used human experience as a metric for justifying rationalism, for justifying thought, for justifying the ultimate reality as used by philosophers. And Iqbal at this point says that the region of mystic experience is as real as any other region of human experience and cannot be ignored merely because it cannot be traced back to sense perception. And why is that? It's because if you try to look at it in terms of the logical reasoning that are used to justify science, the same logical reasoning can be applied to religion, and it will hold up the principles to mystic experience. When I say religion, let's just bring that down to mystic experience or intuition. Those metrics will remain the same, and yet religion or mystic experience will justify each one of them. It's important at this point to understand mystic experience, or what actually is the mystic consciousness. So Myra, Iqbal says that he cannot describe or demonstrate in words what mystic experience is, but he says that what he can do is offer a few general observations of the main characteristics of mystic experience. So at this point we will jump into what, even though we cannot describe what mystic experience is to you, there are a few essential characteristics that are common to every mystic experience that happens to each human across the
world. And I'll try to summarize all 5 of them that are mentioned in this chapter towards the end. So the first is that mystic experience is immediate, right? It happens right there and then. And when you have a normal human experience and you interpret it, the result is that you have some kind of knowledge about the world, right? So if I see this mic and I look at it and I inquire it, I'll figure out, okay, what is it made of, and I'll have some knowledge about the world. However, when you have a mystical experience, when you interpret that experience, you have knowledge about the ultimate reality. So your knowledge is more far-fetched, and it's also, you know more about the ultimate reality, or so to say, God. So that's the first characteristic. The second is that it has an unanalyzable wholeness. So the mystical experience, what it does is, like, now we'll just take an example of this table. So this table is one whole, right? So it has many different specific small points, data points, many data points. So for a normal experience, you are looking at the small data points. But when you have a mystical experience, it introduces you to the whole, to the whole reality. So you're able to see whatever the reality is at that time, you're able to see it in its wholeness. And however, you are unable to really explain it. So what I think, like, this is my own personal opinion, is that here what Iqbal is trying to say is that you cannot really know the reality in its whole, but when you have a mystical experience, you do get some kind of a whole experience. And right now, while you're living in this serial time, in this normal human experiences, you are only able to look at the specific small many data points of the ultimate reality, but you cannot step back and look at it as a whole, because we are incapable of it. That's what I think. And if you want to add something, Beach Man, so just let me know. Okay.
Yeah, sure.
And so the third characteristic is that there is when you have a mystical experience, it has a very objective as well as a very intimate association with this other self. So it's yourself, but it's other, and it's really unique. So you know how we say Allah hamare andar bhi hai, hamare bahar bhi hai. So it's like we're also a part of God. So this experience is, although it's intimate, but it's also objective. So it's like really you cannot really explain it, I think. And to explain this, Iqbal uses the example of a social experience. Like when you meet somebody, when you meet a person, and you don't know the mind of that person, you cannot really experience the mind of that person, but you infer it. So through inference, you know about that person's mind, and you don't really have any doubt about what that person thinks, and you don't have any doubt about what you thought because of the reaction of that other person. Isn't that so? And
Absolutely.
yeah. And would you like to add something to it?
Yeah, just to add to that point, just to give you an example of it, when we say that how we infer the other person's perception of something is, right, anything that we know in this life may not be real.
Yeah.
How do we know it's real?
Yeah.
Is because the way we perceive it, and if we seek a response to it, and if the other person responds to it in the same way, that is our perception of what reality is. So for example, if I call this table a table, it is because another person will acknowledge this thing as also a table, which is why I know that this is real. And so we share, we have a shared reality.
Yeah.
And this is how we know
And
that
just,
what reality
like
is.
when you say, what is your name? And I will answer her, Myra. I won't say red book, because so whatever you were thinking, I answered you in that way. So your confirmation, your thinking was confirmed that it's there and it's true. And when you have a mystical experience, you have the same experience. Like you feel a response, I guess. You feel a response from the divine.
Absolutely.
And that response is from yourself, but it is also from some other self. Like it's not really from you, but it's emanating from you, and you're just like, you don't know how to. And I just want to add to this concept of coincidences. So there was this time in my life when I started really believing that I'd read somewhere that there's no such thing as a coincidence. It's just God reminding you of His presence. And then I started noticing coincidences, and now I realize that sometimes I get such amazing messages about life, about me in general, and they're all through coincidences. And once I sit and think about them, so it is literally like this social experience, and it's like I'm having this social experience with the universe. So the universe is either responding to me, or it is giving me a message, and it is all in line with what I've been thinking or what I've been going through. And I think if all of you watching, and if you try to do this, and if you try to think about the coincidences that happen, you'll see that how the universe is talking to you. So is it God? Like, how is that a way of God? So maybe that's you can say a real-time mystic experience that we can have.
Absolutely.
Okay, speeding up.
So
The
moving on to
fourth
point number 4.
Yeah, the fourth characteristic is that this mystical experience is untransferable. You cannot have it with anybody else. Simple. So it's like it's a feeling. It's not a thought. So you cannot really put it in words. And religion actually starts with feeling, and it doesn't just stay there as a feeling. It tries to explain it with reason, and then it goes after it with respect to metaphysics and reasonable explanations. And the fifth characteristic that Iqbal mentions is that when you have a mystical experience, you kind of have a break from serial time, but that break is not really a whole break. So if you want to explain on it, you can you can do that. But the point of this last characteristic is that when you return to your serial time after that mystical experience, that whole event, that whole experience is so strong, and that it leaves a really deep sense of authority on that person, that it's actually it can transfer you, it can transform you even as a person, according to some philosophers, that it will transform you, and it will, like, the idea of that deep sense of authority is that it is real. You cannot disregard it as something unreal just because it's not perceptible to your senses. You can't say that it didn't happen, because it is something so strong that happened.
So adding to that point, Iqbal also says that in this regard, mystical experience is not so different from any other common experience. Even though it is breaking from serial time, because any other common experience that we have, or human experience, so to speak, is basically limited or encapsulated by serial time, whereas when a person has a mystical experience, he experiences that break. Iqbal says that it's not as if the two are completely separate, because anything that is happening to us on serial time, it is happening on the basis of sense perception and knowledge. And adding to that fact, when a person returns, even if he experiences this short break to experience a mystical experience, he is filled with knowledge, and he is filled with something, an authority that has happened. So in that manner, it is not all that different from common experience, because you're experiencing knowledge and you're left with a deep sense of authority that is common to any other experience that you have in your human life.
Yeah, and I think one thing that we can all relate to it, when we usually in our lives have this sudden aha moments or realizations like, oh, this is what this all meant, you know. Sometimes we have these aha moments like the one I was just telling you about when I was sitting in the car. So what is that aha moment? You're able to step out of your time zone or like serial time, and you're able to see the thing as a whole, like you know, that table analogy we give, which you're not able to do that first, but when you do it, you're like, oh yes, you know. So I think that's what I think that could be an example, a real time example of a mystical experience where you're linking it to a common one.
And that's amazing. So moving on, I think, towards the end of the chapter or closing towards it, how does Iqbal say that you are to separate mystical experience from demonic urges? Or how can you differentiate that this experience that you had just right now was spiritual and not basically the whisperings of demons? How can you... How does
For
Iqbal
that,
say that?
Iqbal says that you do not understand the mystical experience through the root, like where it came from. You understand it through the fruit. So what is it making you do? What is it making you believe? So if it is making you do something demonic or bad, so you know that it is not from the divine who loves you, who cares for you, then it is from a bad source. So I think you need to judge the source of the mystical experience by its fruit. Like what is its aim, and what does it want you to do, and what does it lead you to into actually believing or doing?
Absolutely. So I think this is the point at which we come to a close of our first chapter. In the next chapter, Iqbal says that he will judge the basis of religion, or the philosophical test of revelations of religious experience by two tests. One is the pragmatic test and one is the intellectual test. An intellectual test basically is the one that he will use, which is basically stripping any experience of all human experiences and discovering whether our interpretation lead us to the reality of a same character as revealed by a religious experience. If you like take away your human experience of it and say, this is the data points that I'm using just based on intellect, does it lead me to the same result as what I would otherwise experience through
and that's
religion?
just chapter 2.
And this chapter 2.
Okay.
So I think,
See you all
I think, guys, we have covered a lot of material, a lot of intense concept that we've tried to simplify for you during this first chapter, and I hope it was helpful.
I hope it was helpful. It really was, especially because of your input. And one thing that I would really like to suggest everybody who's watching is just read the first chapter as well, so that you also have an understanding of what it is about. And then maybe you can pre-read chapter 2 as well, and then you can listen to us and what we have to say, and then you can maybe have a deeper understanding of all the other chapters as well as chapter 2.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, guys.